Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Sitrep podcast, your forward operations space for all things military and historical wargaming. I am your host, Oriskany Jim, and you're looking at a nearly broken man. I say nearly because here at the Sitrep podcast, we never give up. Okay, that was sort of a weird intro. Let me go ahead and summarize. Long story short, take your first shot. We suffered something of a hardware catastrophe. The hard drive more or less melted right out of my laptop. So a lot of the completed content and raw footage that was sort of going to be our pipeline through the rest of August, we have unfortunately lost. Now, while most of this stuff was backed up, sadly some of it wasn't. So suffice it to say, I'm in something of a recovery mode here. And the first thing I'm going to try to bring you guys is what you're supposed to be looking at today. This was going to be a 15mm tabletop game put on by my friend Ritchie, recreating the Battle of Primosole Bridge. This involved the Red Devils, the 1st British Airborne Brigade of the 1st Airborne Division, which landed at Primosole Bridge as part of Operation Husky, in turn part of Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943. Operation Husky was actually the second stage of the airborne operation. The first stage, Operation Ladbroke, was more conventional. This is where the British were trying to land gliders and paratroopers right at the moment of the seaborne invasion and kind of make things easier for the initial advance of the 8th Army. Operation Husky, on the other hand, took place 3 days later. And this is where the Red Devils landed a little bit further north at Primsole Bridge over the Cemento River. This was leading toward the town of Catania. This was going to be part of a breakout and exploitation phase of Operation Husky, getting 8th Army out of that initial beachhead and further up the Sicilian coast. Now, while we did lose the tabletop footage, this was an absolutely fantastic scenario by Mark. Also, we had fantastic play with my opponents and my teammates. A lot of some top shelf cinematic stuff happened on this table. I absolutely refuse to lose it to the mists of time because of a friggin' hardware failure. So I was able to recreate the map virtually. I remember everything that happened on the table, so I'm going to be able to at least bring you the highlights of what happened on our game in an abridged format. So again, I know this isn't really what we're used to here on the Sitrep podcast. It certainly wasn't what I hoped to bring you guys today. But again, we're doing the best we can under the circumstances. I hope you guys enjoy this recap of our scenario at Primsole Bridge. Alright everyone, here is our map. Again, I apologize for the crudeness of this map. This is hardly up to normal Oriskany standards. I will say, however, that it's pretty accurate for the scenario that we were playing on the day. Because one thing that Mark does is when he's designing one of his scenarios, he puts his 8x6 tables into a drawing, into a grid, and he publishes that out to all the players so that we can maybe do some pre-planning, decide who we want to play, who we want to team up with, and so on. So I still have access to that map. I've been able to sort of recreate it here to scale. So this really was what the 8x6 table looked like. You'll see where the British currently hold Primsole Bridge. The historical Battle of Primsole Bridge lasted, honestly, about 3 days, and that bridge changed hands several times. At first, one of the battalions of a local Italian coastal division held the bridge. In come the Red Devils. They were able to take the bridge from them rather quickly. However, they were then counterattacked by some pretty powerful Italian forces. However, once the Italians were reinforced by some newly arriving German forces, namely lead elements of what they call Kampfgruppe Stangenberg, they were part of 1st Fallschirmjager Division, as best as I can tell, the British were forced to give up the bridge. But right away, the 2nd Battalion commander of the 1st Para Brigade, this is our boy John Frost, made some immediate counterattacks toward Primsole Bridge, and again, this is where that seesaw battle sort of began to burn through. One side would hold the bridge, then the other. This starts on July 13th, it goes through the 14th. We're now on the morning of the 15th, the 3rd day of the battle. As we can see, the British currently hold the bridge. So There's a platoon of Paras here. There's a 6-pound anti-tank gun here. They were brought in by some of the gliders that we see here. Again, normally 1st Para Brigade is, of course, a parachute unit. For this operation, they did have some gliders that were helping them bring in some of their heavier equipment, specifically 3-inch Stokes mortars or 76mm mortars, and again, these 6-pound anti-tank guns that we see here. So we had Steve playing this force of the Red Devils here. John Sowerby was playing some of these Red Devils here on the other side of the Cemente River that Primosole Bridge is crossing. Again, Catania is further off to the north, off this edge of the table. And the game starts off with the Germans attacking along with some elements of 10th Adriti Brigade. This was a sort of mechanized infantry brigade of a local Italian division. These guys were actually pretty solid. They were being carried by a lot of those AS-37 and 42 Saharini armored cars or armored trucks. Some of them were carrying 20mm autocannon, which makes them pretty damn dangerous. So turn 1, I come in with the Germans. Yeah, this is me right here. And we come right onto the table. Now what I'm trying to do here, it was a mixed force of some prime movers, some SDKFZ 250s with some flak on them, some mechanized infantry. I knew there was a 6-pounder here. By the way, me advancing in along this northwest road was not my idea. This was part of the scenario requirements, so I got kind of a crap hand dealt to me. I tried to use distance and some of these trees over here along the side of the road to my best ability. It didn't work at all. Steve was able to draw a bead on me with his 6-pound anti-tank gun. I should say also that John Frost was right about here. Let me go ahead and mark his spot. And anything within 16 centimeters of John Frost's position was going to get a +3 bonus to hit. So while the weapons wouldn't be any more powerful as far as getting through my armor, they would be deadly accurate. And again, my entire force was half-tracks, and some of them weren't even like Hanomaugs or even the 250s. These were the big prime movers like SDKFZ 7s and 10s. One of the units I had coming on the table was trying to drag an 8.8 centimeter Flak 36. You can guess how that went. So his very first shot destroyed the half-track that was towing the 88mm. I was then able to hitch another vehicle to the 88mm. That took pretty much a whole movement phase. 88mm is like about a 7-ton gun. Turn it around 180 degrees, unlimber it again, try to draw a bead on somebody. I got exactly one shot, missed of course, and then that 6-pounder hit my 88mm, and that was that. So in summary, I was in an anti-tank gun fight with an 88mm against a 6-pounder, and I was losing. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the kind of day I was having. So, like they say, long story short, take your whatever shot. Yeah, I was getting the absolute hell kicked out of me along this road. I think I lost a good third of my initial element in the very first fire phase. By the end of turn 3, I was pretty much a shattered force. I had almost nothing left because I had paras in this house, in that house. There was also a stone wall along this road, machine guns in these captured Italian bunkers, a 6-pound gun, and then on top of everything else, John was flanking me with a platoon of his Red Devils and shooting at me from across the river here. So I was in basically a 5-way crossfire, and yeah, not doing very well. The good news is I had some allies, and this was Mike and Tom with their Italians. So again, they came in mostly with those lightly armored trucks. Some of them are carrying 20mm autocannon, those Brady guns and things like that, and they start doing really well, like really well, especially down here where Mike was hella aggressive. This is one of the things I definitely wanted to talk about. So there were some British paras taking cover behind these red gliders from when they first arrived here 3 days ago. They were using them as a bit of light cover. And in comes some Italian motorcycles. So it was Sons of Anarchy, except to make that Sons of Mussolini Sicily chapter. He rolls up, they jump off the motorcycles, and they immediately engage in close combat with one of the British +2 leaders over here. I guess he was one of the captains. And yeah, it was basically a simultaneous overrun and close assault, and they wound up killing that officer. It was only 1 or 2 guys in that little command element, but again, anything within a certain distance of those guys, get a pretty serious bonus to hit. Again, it's a +2 in a game where you're usually shooting at 5s, 6s, 4s, or 3s on a D20. So a +2 bonus can almost double, if not give you at least 50% bonus on your chance. Long story short, take your 20th shot. I mean, I've lost track by this point. Knocking out that British officer was definitely a big deal. Here comes another thing for the Italians. This is going to make you laugh even more. There was a flamethrower operator. I guess you would call it engineer, sapper. A flamethrower guy in the back of one of these armored trucks. He rolls up to this house. The truck basically crashes into the house. The flamethrower guy who's in the back of the truck dives through the window, does a bit of a somersault through this very small cottage here, and comes to the window. And there are, again, some more paratroopers, including a British medic. They're hiding out in those woods. And that flamethrower goes into those woods, and that's it. Now, he did miss the commander that he was aiming at. There was an SMG commander there, but he did drift slightly off to his right and wound up killing a British medic and I think a light machine gunner. Simultaneously, the flamethrower guy himself is killed. So it was basically an action scene right out of Rambo, except Rambo got killed here. Needless to say, the Italians were being very aggressive here on the southern end of the map. Clearly they could see that I was in a lot of trouble over here. But things were going pretty well over here, which thank God, because I sure as hell was not going to reach the bridge the way things were going for me. A little bit later in the game, I do get some reinforcements. I think they arrived on turn 7. So some slightly tougher units. There was a Mark III in there, as well as, I think there were 2 Mark IIIs in there, some armored cars, and some more half-tracks, so I was feeling a little bit better. One of my initial shots did go in and take out that goddamn 6-pounder. I hated that guy. But I had a lot more problems coming up. So as I started trying to move up with some of my armor, I took some incredible damage. One thing that hit me on top of everything else, lands right on top of me, and that pretty much wipes out all of my new infantry, all of my new anti-tank guns, and my new medium machine guns, all my reinforcements except for, again, a couple of my tanks and some armored cars and half-tracks. Pretty much everything that wasn't armored was taken out in one barrage of offshore naval bombardment. So yeah, that was definitely not fun. And as I tried to push up this olive grove here and towards the bridge, I start taking Piat fire from these paras that are hidden in these buildings and behind, again, the stone wall that's going along this northwestern road here. Now, I was able to kill the Piat gunner. I was able to kill him again, and I killed him again after that. The problem is, Mark's system contains a mechanic where if certain crew-served weapons or special materials are carried by one of your infantrymen, like bazookas, Piats, satchel charges, things like that, if that man goes down, there's a roll to see if the actual equipment has been destroyed. It's 6 or less on a D20, and for the life of me, I was not able to score that. So what Steve was able to do was keep sending out more paras, pick up that Piat, aim it at the flank of my vehicles, and they're gonna hit because, again, everything's got a +3 to hit bonus because they're within a certain distance of John Frost there behind the bridge. So very, very quickly, I wound up losing both of my new tanks. I think I lost them both in almost one turn. That's not really possible, but I wound up losing both of those tanks in very, very quick succession. I wound up with an armored car and I think an empty half-track. I managed to eventually get them on the bridge. I finally killed all these guys. It took forever, but I finally got the job done. And when those were finally killed, the anti-tank gun was smoked. We were able to smoke these machine guns out of these bunkers, or at least out of this bunker. I think the Italians took care of that bunker for me. And I was able to, I think, finally get at least one vehicle onto Primsole Bridge. By the way, this new armor platoon is labeled HG for Hermann Goering. the actual makeup of Kampfgruppe Stangenberg, as far as I can tell, was 1st Fallschirmjager Division. However, there are tanks in this game, and Hermann Goering Division was in the immediate area. And all German Kampfgruppe are very sort of ad hoc, thrown together, whatever's within yelling distance. You come with me, you get in that tank, you come with me. Congratulations, you now command a Kampfgruppe, we're heading down the road. It's very possible, I'm not really an expert on this part of the campaign, whether or not there were any Hermann Goering units mixed in with Kampfgruppe Stangenberg, but we're going to say that they were, because I don't think that 1st Fallschirmjager had any actual tanks in their order of battle. So just when it looked like there might be a little bit of hope for getting at least one operational combat vehicle onto Primosole Bridge, here come the British reinforcements. Now, I won't complain too much. John had to roll for these new reinforcements to come on. I should say this is leading elements of the Durham Light Infantry, part of 50th Northumbrian Division. And he kept failing his roll. So I don't think they arrived until at least turn 9 or turn 10. But when they did, yeah, there was a whole bunch of new mechanized infantry coming up the road. These guys were mounted in converted Stuarts. So they took like M3, M5 Stuarts, light tanks, Lend-Lease from earlier in the war. They took the turrets off of them and they tried to sort of turn them into almost half-ass APCs. So those were definitely going to be a threat. And even worse, there was at least the significant portion, I don't know if it was a full troop, but it was at least 3 or 4. So 4 would be a full troop of Shermans, again, of Durham Light Infantry. And these clowns start coming up the road, and all of a sudden these Italians that have been doing pretty well suddenly have to fight in 2 directions. Because clearly they're still facing elements of 2nd Battalion, 1st Para Brigade there on their front, and now they're facing British mechanized infantry and armor to their rear. There were some Italian reinforcements that came on. I think it's pretty cool how all this stuff was coming on from the south. Usually reinforcements for opposite sides come in from different sides of the table. Here everything was coming in from the south. This was just part of the chaotic race for Primosole Bridge, and all units sort of imploding on this one decisive point that we saw, especially on the 3rd day of this historic battle. So some light armor does show up. There's going to be some very, very poor Italian tanks there. But really what's there are some Semoventi assault guns, which are actually pretty solid. And what they start to do is take these pillboxes under fire. And thank God, man, because that's what finally silences the rest of this machine gun fire coming at me from Primosole Bridge itself. Meanwhile, there's a hell of a battle going on right in here. Again, we've got 10th Ardenti sort of pushing against these Paras. These Paras are more or less wiped out. I know this group was pretty much wiped out. And the reason I know that is because Tom had to go home, so I was given command of the remnants of this little force coming up through the gliders. And I was able to come up here. Again, this medium machine gun is by now out of here. And what I was able to do was finally reach the southern tip of Primosole Bridge with, I think, 2 trucks. So that kind of wins the game there. Meanwhile, these guys are coming down here. I'm not exactly sure how these Italians were able to shut down Durham Light Infantry. I should say they didn't really shut them down. They just slowed them down. They didn't knock out all the tanks, but whatever tanks they didn't knock out, they either immobilized or they knocked out the main gun. So they sort of shot the Durham Light Infantry's advance down to a bloody crawl. I was in the midst of a life or death battle for survival over here, so I don't really know how he was able to do that, but they must have been some hot die rolling because, yeah. Again, by no means was Durham Light Infantry destroyed, but they weren't going to reach Primosole Bridge, at least not in time. By now, the very last of these paratroopers had been pushed back here to Primosole Bridge, and what finally sealed the deal was Mike was able to come in from the northeast with the last elements of his 10th RDD platoon here. There were some commandos in there. I should mention that real quick. Some of 10th RDD were commandos, and some of these commando battalions were recruited from former paratroopers. So you had 1st Fallschirmjager, you had the Red Devils, and you even had some former Italian paratroopers. You had paratroopers from 3 nations on the table, pretty much all at the same time. And one of those guys was, again, carrying that flamethrower. He was able to walk up to my man John Frost and with a really, really sweet roll. He pretty much human hibachi poor John Frost. That was the end of that. It looks like Anthony Hopkins is going to have to play a different character when they make A Bridge Too Far, because in this timeline, my man John Frost did not make it off Primosole Bridge. He was cooked alive by an Italian flamethrower, and by now we have sort of mixed results here. So the objective was to get at least one operational combat vehicle onto Primosole Bridge. If the Axis could do that by the end of turn 15, and they could hold it for the end of turn 15, the Axis wins the game. Well, I did manage to get a half-track, actually two, a half-track and an armored car onto Primosole Bridge. The problem was Steve still had infantry all about, and he was able to shoot into my vehicles until he basically killed everybody in those vehicles. Those were, again, armored cars, and especially half-tracks with pencil-mounted weapons. My guys had to come out of the vehicle to operate those weapons. So whenever they did that, he had snipers and machine gunners take my guys out. So although I did have two light vehicles on the bridge, neither of them were considered operational combat vehicles. So technically speaking, Oriskany Jim did not win the game, even though I had two vehicles there. What did win the game were these Italians here from the southwest, who did reach the bridge with, I think, two vehicles. Those they were either AS-37s or AS-42s, and especially the infantry who were now on the bridge after killing the last Paras on the bridge and sort of flambeing their commander. There were a couple of last-minute questions because there were some Shermans down here. I think there was one Sherman that might have had a line of sight, but you would have to shoot through past this hill, past this olive grove, through all the girders of the bridge, and have to hit one of my vehicles. It turned out to be a moot point because we wound up reaching the bridge here. So, yeah, there was a little bit of an argument about line of sight there. And then the last sort of straw of hope for the British, they tried to call in another fire mission from HMS Newfoundland, and it didn't come in. So one last big gigantic 6-inch barrage might have landed here and taken out the unarmored vehicles and infantry that were clinging to the southern part of the bridge. Turned out it didn't happen, so the British lost that last bid for victory. So, against all odds, and despite one of the most horrific entries onto the table, at least for my Germans, the Axis winds up winning the game. I stress Axis because I'll promise you this much for free: the Germans did not win this game. If this game is going down as an Axis win, it's all due to the Italians. All right, guys, there you have it. Again, I do regret that I wasn't able to bring you the actual tabletop footage. Hopefully here I was able to at least give you the highlights and sort of recap what happened in what was seriously a pretty awesome scenario. There's just no way I'm going to claim to be the winning player as the Germans. I just happen to be lucky enough to be on the winning team. When the Axis won this game, it was definitely the Italians who carried all the water. They were the ones who got those vehicles up to the southern end of the British bridge, and it was their commandos who sort of turned my man John Frost into the human hibachi. Now, we did lose a lot of other raw footage for some other games that we hope to be bringing to you guys. Suffice it to say, I'm going to be spending the rest of this week rebuilding a lot of assets. The good news is I do still have some tabletop footage available for a 15mm Vietnam game. Keep an eye out for that. Hopefully by this time next week we'll be back up to the usual Oriskany standard and you guys can be returned to your regularly scheduled programming. So that's where we're going to leave it for now, folks. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content, or in the case of this week, if you're able to excuse this content. Please hit that notification bell. Also, please consider joining the Sitrep Podcast Discord. There is an auto-accept invitation link to our Discord in the description of this video. Come by, join the community, see what everybody's up to, and best of all, show us what's happening on your hobby table. But for now, this is Oriskany Jim with the Sitrep Podcast. We are rounds complete for another episode, and as always, Tango Mike for watching.